Hello and welcome to AmericanNavalHistory.com. My name is John Sorensen, and this is a series of lessons intended to teach the history of the United States Navy. Our Navy has a long and proud history of being a global force for good. Okay, well today we're going to finish the war with the Barbary pirates. This is really where it gets good. Of course, you know, it's like any story. When you get to the end, you get to the climax, and that's where it gets most exciting. I'm going to talk about Edward Preble, Stephen Decatur, and of course the United States Marine Corps planting the flag back on the shores of Tripoli. Shortly after the return of the second mission from the Mediterranean Sea and the firing of Captain Richard Morris, Thomas Jefferson chose Edward Preble to lead the third mission. Preble was a midshipman in the Massachusetts Navy during the Revolutionary War. He worked on merchant ships after the war, and then he joined the United States Navy during the Quasi-War with France, and there he was given a commission and was the commanding officer of a frigate USS Essex. Okay, he was known for his excellent seamanship, but he was not known to be much of a leader or a warrior. But that would soon change. At first, Preble was very much disliked by his junior officers. He drilled them and drilled them and drilled them, and he drilled them hard. And he was also a very strong disciplinarian, and he required his junior officers to be strong disciplinarians for their men. But it was very soon they realized the value of their hard training and discipline. These junior officers not only won the war against Tripoli, but they also went on to become senior officers during the War of 1812 and were very successful during that war. Although Preble died in 1807, many authors give him a lot of credit for the American victory in the War of 1812. His junior officers, they became known as Preble's boys, and as they became senior officers, they were responsible for every victory at sea during the War of 1812, except for the Battle of Lake Erie. And every one of them who had command of a ship during the War of 1812 captured at least one British vessel. Like I said before, Preble's fleet was the third mission into the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, of the four Barbary states, only Tripoli was actually at war against the United States. It was the Bashaw of Tripoli that actually cut down the American flagpole. Algiers had accepted a tribute, and they were not really, you know, once the first task force over there arrived in Algiers with the two big frigates and showed them the strength of the American Navy, Algiers decided they weren't really too interested in going to war against the United States when they saw those frigates. And Tunis was pretty much the same thing. When they saw those two frigates, you know, showed up at Tunis, they decided they really didn't want to go to war against the United States. And Morocco never really had much of an interest to go to war against the United States either. But when Preble got to the Mediterranean, he decided to go ahead and show his frigates off to Algiers and Tunis and Morocco again, and just to kind of reaffirm their commitment to peace, and that worked. You know, there's nothing will make you want peace more than the sight of these two big Navy frigates at your front door. Now, Preble's fleet, his squadron, departed from the United States to the Mediterranean on the 14th of August of 1803. They arrived in Gibraltar in the middle of September of 1803, and Preble, he sent the frigate USS Philadelphia and the schooner the USS Vixen to blockade the port of Tripoli. Now, the Philadelphia was commanded by Captain William Bainbridge, and we can remember Captain Bainbridge was the only captain to to lose a ship during the quasi-war with France. And he was also the one who brought the tribute to the Dey of Algiers, when the Dey of Algiers treated them so badly and made them bring 100 passengers and their 100 servants and all the animals to Constantinople and carry his tribute. And basically, the king of Algiers called William Bainbridge his slave. And then Bainbridge was also the commanding officer of the Essex during the first Mediterranean task force when the incident in Barcelona happened when Stephen Decatur challenged the Spanish naval officer to a duel, and it was William Bainbridge that had to deal with the Spanish authorities to quiet down that situation. And a lot of books say that William Bainbridge was probably the most unlucky officer the United States Navy ever had, but his luck was just starting to get bad. It gets even worse. Captain Bainbridge was on the Philadelphia patrolling the waters off the coast of Tripoli in October of 1803, and Preble was on the Constitution, and he went up to Syracuse, Sicily, to set up a little naval depot, little supply station up there. And in October 1803, the Philadelphia was blown off station by a storm. So they're out there patrolling right off the Tripoli port there, and the storm come up and blew them off station. And it took them a couple of days for Captain Bainbridge to get the Philadelphia back on his post. And when he got there, on October 31st, again 1803, there was a small vessel trying to run the blockade, and Bainbridge did what a good captain does. He goes into pursuit and starts chasing it, and he chased it into waters that he knew was very, very shallow, and he posted lead sounders at the bow of his ship to receive depth readings every 15 seconds. He had two teams of up there reading off every 30 seconds, so he got readings every 15 seconds, and the water became too shallow to continue. He attempted to turn back into deeper waters, but he ran aground, and his initial attempts to sail out of it actually forced the bow deeper into the sandbar and deeper into the ground, and the ship was listing to one side, and the bow was ramped upwards, and there was just nothing that he could do to free the ship off the shoal water that he had grounded himself on. Now, once Bainbridge had the Philadelphia run aground, he did everything he could to get that ship off that sandbar. He ordered the ship to be lightened. All the fresh water was pumped overboard. All the heavy cannons and the cannonballs and the powder were jettisoned overboard. And he even cut down the mast to try to lighten the ship so that it would float off the sandbar. But nothing he could do worked. And the cannons he did keep on board were pointed aft, and it made them very vulnerable to attack by the Tripolitan corsairs that were circling him like sharks in the water, just watching him struggle to get himself free. And they were stuck, and they had no choice but to surrender. And again, that's what they did. And the Bashaw of Tripoli now had an American frigate and 309 prisoners to bargain with. A few days later, a storm came up and blew the Philadelphia off the sandbar into the hands of the Tripolitan Navy. Now, they had to bring it into Tripoli and put it in port, and they had a lot of restoration to do because I guess Bainbridge had done a lot of damage to it. They were cutting holes in the bottom of it so to make it unuseful if they got captured. So the last thing they did was poke holes in the bottom of it, and they did whatever damage they could to it. So when the Tripolitan Navy did get a hold of it, they had to bring it in port for repairs. And it was the prison that they put Captain Bainbridge and the crew in overlooked the harbor, so they could oversee all the repairs that were going on that the Tripolitans were doing it, and they just basically were sitting there watching the ship get repaired, you know, in their prison cell. And Commodore Preble was very, very, very upset about the loss of the Philadelphia, because not only did he lose a frigate, but now Tripoli had a frigate to use against the American Navy. And that was a pretty scary proposition, you know, because these were powerful ships, and to have one in the hands of the enemy going to be used against you was a sobering thought to Commodore Preble. Now Preble knew that he could not go into Tripoli and retake the Philadelphia where it was in port. There were 25,000 troops in the city and over 100 cannons overlooking the harbor. Going in and sailing out with the Philadelphia, not knowing what stage of repair it was in, would be an impossible task to do. So the next best idea that they could come up with was to destroy the Philadelphia and take it away as a threat against the American Navy. And Stephen Decatur pretty much led this mission. He was a 24-year-old commander of the USS Enterprise, and he asked his crew for volunteers to go on a very dangerous mission. He told them, you know, hey, this is going to be a dangerous thing, and probably we're all going to get killed, but I need some volunteers. And every single one of his crew members volunteered to go on that mission. Even the boys, even the cabin boys wanted to go. And he chose 70 of them, and he picked the strongest and the youngest and the strongest and the healthiest to go. He picked 70 of them, and on the night of February 16th, 1804. So this is November, December, January, February. This is 4 months later. On February 16th, 1804, Stephen Decatur, 70 volunteers, and a Tripolitan native who was banished to Sicily boarded a Tripolitan ship. Now they had captured a Tripolitan ship, and it was perfect to use a Tripolitan ship, because approaching the harbor it wouldn't arouse any suspicion. Okay, so the 70 volunteers, the Tripolitan native, you know, and Stephen Decatur, they all got on this ship in February 16th, 1804, and sailed into the Tripoli harbor. As they approached the Philadelphia, there were guards on the Philadelphia, and the guards challenged them, and, you know, what are you guys doing here, coming up to our ship? And the Tripolitan native that they had on board told them in their own language that he was a friendly ship, and they had lost their anchor, and he needed to tie up to the frigate because they didn't have an anchor to drop anchor. And so the Americans threw the lines over to him. The Tripolitan guards actually grabbed the lines and tied them up. And as they were getting tied up and secured up there, the guards noticed, hey, these are Americans, and that pretty much Stephen Decatur said charge, and all the men rushed out and jumped aboard and started a fight. It was one of those hand-to-hand combat type deals on the deck of the ship, swords and tomahawks and every other weapon that they had. And actually, the one book said that no guns were fired. It kept it quiet so that nobody on shore would be suspicious of it. And most of the guards were unarmed. 20 of them ended up being killed. The rest of them jumped overboard and swam to shore. And it only took 10 minutes, and the Americans had full possession of the ship, and they started bringing all the combustibles aboard and started letting it on fire and blowing it up, putting some gunpowder in all the strategic places, and they let it on fire so fast they didn't get everybody off. And actually they did get off, but the guys who were the last ones off, they had to run through the flames to get back to the Intrepid, which was the ship that they had brought in there. And they all got back into the Intrepid and started sailing away. And at that point, you want to have an Everroot outboard motor on your boat, but they only had sails, and as they sailed off, everybody on shore was firing muskets and cannons at them, and luckily their aim was off. They were hit once, and a cannonball went through their sail, but nobody was hurt, and no American lives were lost. And the Philadelphia was set ablaze and could never be used against the Americans during the war, or never be used again, actually. And Stephen Decatur became a national hero because of this battle, because of this raid. Now, after the burning of the Philadelphia, throughout the rest of the spring and the summer of 1804, Commodore Preble wanted to continue to keep the pressure on Tripoli. So he wanted to bombard them every day, but the only trouble was the water was too shallow to get the Constitution within firing range of the city. So they went off and they bought a bunch of a whole fleet or a squadron of small gunboats from the Kingdom of Naples, who was happy to sell them the boats. And these were small boats that had 1 or 2 cannons on them, and they would sail them right up through the shallow water, right up to the harbor of Tripoli, and start firing upon the fort and the city. And what would happen would be the Tripolitan Navy. They would come out to meet these guys, and they would have a battle at sea among the small gunboats. And a lot of times, what happened more often than not was these ships would come alongside each other, and the men would jump cross deck from one ship to the other and get into hand-to-hand combat, sword fighting, all the swashbuckling type of Errol Flynn swinging from the rafters type fighting is what the war degenerated into. And this was very common throughout the spring and the summer of 1804. Stephen Decatur almost got himself killed. A couple good books. Nathan Miller's book, Broadside, describes in detail how he Stephen Decatur almost got killed in a sword fight. But it's very exciting to read. Go ahead and read that if you get a chance. Nathan Miller's Broadside. Anyways, soon, though, by the end of the summer, Thomas Jefferson decided to relieve Commodore Preble with Samuel Barron. And he sent over a fleet of ships with 5 frigates, 3 brigs, and 3 schooners, and a bunch of other smaller ships, along with Samuel Barron, to take command away from Preble. Now, Preble, after 3 years of this war, nothing getting done, and Preble goes over there and starts kicking butt. And all of a sudden, right when things are getting, going good for America, the president relieves the commanding officer and puts another man in charge, and it just kind of deflates the whole thing. It kind of like it deflates the whole spirit of the war that was going on. I mean, people were following their commander, and the commander was winning battles, and loyalty, and they were loyal to their commander, and all of a sudden he's relieved. Jefferson knew it was a mistake to do it, but it was time for rotation, and they decided that the regulation had to be followed, and that's what they did. Samuel Barron's fleet that came over, his squadron included the 5 frigates: the President, the Constitution, the Congress, the Constellation, and the Essex. But it also brought over a gentleman by the name of William Eaton. William Eaton had been the American consul of Tunis, so he was real familiar with the situation on shore. And he spoke the language. He even put on the Arab headdress and the robes and went to Egypt. And in Egypt, he looked up and he found the older brother of the Bashaw of Tripoli. And the older brother had been kicked off the throne by his younger brother and had always thought, hey, that's supposed to be my throne. But he was in hiding in Egypt. So this William Eaton, he found Hamet, was his name, and talked him into going back to Tripoli to reclaim his kingdom. And he had a few followers that rightfully thought that they either thought that Hamet should be the king, or they just didn't like the way that his little brother was running things. And he had a few followers that would come along, and Eaton also hired some mercenaries, and not missionaries, mercenaries. He hired some mercenaries, and they had a band of about 500 or so folks, and they said, well, let's go, and we'll go from Egypt to Tripoli and take your kingdom back for you. And they also had a very small group of United States Marines in this group, and they were led by Lieutenant Presley O'Brien. Okay, he was the leader of the 7 or 8 Marines that were there, and maybe a sailor or two. But they actually marched across the 600 miles of desert from Alexandria, Egypt, to Tripoli, or actually to Denair, which is a coastal town on the Mediterranean Sea. But it was part of the Tripolitan kingdom. And they did this, and as they went along, they met all these other tribes, and the tribes joined them, and the army just got bigger and bigger as they moved closer, and they took Derna in a battle. It took them a couple battles, but they took Derna, and they also had the help of the American fleet offshore firing, and this put a lot of pressure on the Bashaw, knowing that his older brother was coming after him, and he had a large army, and the size of the army got exaggerated when his intelligence told him how big the army was. And so he offered a peace treaty that would require America to pay him $150,000, and the Americans said no, and put more and more pressure on them, and they got ready to move on towards the city of Tripoli. But then there was an American diplomat that was authorized to negotiate with him, named Lear. Now Lear negotiated. His name was Tobias Lear, Tobias, Tobias Lear. And he actually negotiated a peace treaty with the Bashaw of Tripoli, and this peace treaty required the United States to pay $60,000, but that wasn't a tribute. That was a ransom for the crew of the Philadelphia. When the Americans would not pay a tribute, but they called it a ransom, and they would go ahead and pay that. And this Lear, he took a lot of criticism for negotiating that deal. And his answer was this: if we'd have pushed the king off the throne by force, his last act of king would have been to slaughter William Bainbridge and the entire 309-member crew of the USS Philadelphia. But if we negotiate and let him stay on his throne, we can give him $60,000, and we'll get the 309 crew members back, and we'll get them to promise not to raid our ships anymore, which is what he did. And the brother Hammett, he was allowed to stay in Derna, where he had captured him, so kind of like be a governor of that one little area within the kingdom, as the Bashar stayed on the throne. So following this negotiated peace with the Bashar of Tripoli, there were not any problems between American merchant ships and the Barbary pirates until, I guess, after the War of 1812 and about 1815. Some of the pirates thought that, hey, maybe the United States Navy had been weakened by that war, and they got a little frisky, but they soon found out that the United States Navy was still there to protect the merchant ships, and very shortly after that, all trouble with the Barbary pirates was over. My name is John Sorensen, and thank you for listening to AmericanNavalHistory.com.